Hello, my name is Matt McCann. I'm an Irish philosopher, PhD researcher, and part-time lecturer in philosophy and ethics. And this is part 6 of a lecture series on Plato's Republic. If you haven't checked out the other episodes, recommend checking those out. They'll be in the description. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing the good and Plato's analogy for the good of the sun and the divided line. So to briefly recap, at the high point of book 5, we have the third wave when Plato recommends that philosophers should be kings and kings should be philosophers. This is actually the only practical thing he recommends. So we go through the whole city experiment, and then Glaucon asks the question of like, this is all great, but can we actually do it in reality? And this changes the tact of the whole conversation. When politics fails, we start to talk about philosophy. It comes up as the first explicit time in philosophy of like, why can't we have this ideal society? It's like, what's up with us? Why are we so dysfunctional, and how can we get over that? The only thing that Plato actually recommends doing is that philosophers become kings and kings become philosophers. As we talked about in the last episode, this is because philosophers have knowledge and not opinion, because they know the forms. The forms are the things that really are. Their forms are what exist, and opinion is a knowledge of parts of reality, of images, of appearances. And so the philosophers are the ones that have undergone the journey out of the cave, seen through the appearances to the forms beyond, and hence can tell the difference between forms and appearances. They can know justice versus fake justice. They can know wisdom over fake wisdom. And so they're the most capable rulers, essentially. Importantly, philosophers are lovers of wisdom. The love is primary, and the love is the motivational force that takes them on this journey to know the ultimate forms. And in this chapter, we're going to talk about the form of forms, the form of the good. Interestingly, at the high point of the Republic, Plato introduces the highest point of reality in his philosophy, which is the form of the good. So this is great. Philosophers should be kings, kings should be philosophers. But then Adamantius objects to Socrates, and he says, this is all good and well, but anybody that actually studies philosophy either becomes a crank or completely useless to the city. So what's up with that? Socrates agrees that philosophers are useless by the standards of the state. And how can it be true then that we say that there will be no end to the evils in our cities if we agree philosophers, who are people who are useless, rule in them? Bit of a problem. Philosophers are useless people should be in charge. So Socrates responds with an analogy that compares the state to a ship. In this analogy, the state is a ship, and the ship's owners are the people of the democracy. The sailors are like the sophists that think they have knowledge but don't really care about the truth. And the navigator is the philosopher. Sailors think the navigator is paying attention to irrelevant things because they lack true knowledge of navigation. They don't know about how to read the winds, how to read the stars, how to tell where the ship should be going. And so they just think this guy's just wandering around doing nothing. And so the sailors then want to foment a rebellion against the navigator because they don't have the knowledge themselves, so they think the navigator is useless. A great term for a philosopher that comes up here is that a philosopher is a useless stargazer, a babbler, a good for nothing that really doesn't do anything. Socrates argues that a true captain must pay attention to the seasons of the year, the sky, the stars, the winds, and all that pertains to his craft if he is really to be the ruler of the ship. But for the sailors and the ship's owner, the people of the democracy, they don't care about any of this stuff. They just want to get to where they're going, and they don't really care how. So Socrates' point is that the majority don't care about the truth, and therefore the person who cares about the truth should lead the rest, like the navigator. The natural thing is for a sick person to knock at the doctor's door, and for anyone who needs to be ruled to knock at the door of the one who can rule him, which is the one who knows the truth. But of course, it doesn't go like this all the time. Oftentimes, people think they know the truth when they actually don't. They have opinions rather than knowledge, and so they don't listen to the navigator. He kind of launches into a big explanation of why these people are corrupt in the first place, why the sailors and the ship's owners are corrupt. And really the argument is that it's a result of bad education or upbringing. He says, sitting together in assemblies, courts, theatres, army camps, or in some other public gathering of the crowd, they object very loudly and excessively to some of the things that are said or done and approve others in the same way, so that the very rocks and surroundings echo the din of their praise or blame and double it. In circumstances like that, what is the effect, as they say, on a young man's heart? In other words, corrupt societies reward corrupt things. Most people learn through reinforcement learning, through what they're rewarded for, like applause, or what they're punished for, like people booing. And so when that social feedback shapes the young person, they end up corrupted because the society's education and upbringing is corrupted. And that's why people end up not knowing reality, because of the lack of education. And you'll remember, education is the number one issue for Plato. This is what he spends like the whole of the Republic talking about, is the ideal education system, in a sense. Like, his metaphor of the cave is a dramatization of what proper education should be. For Socrates to become a good character in the environment of his Greek democracy constituted a kind of miracle. What was far more likely to be happening would that somebody that was particularly ambitious would learn to manipulate people like a great beast, he describes, learning what makes them cheer, learning what makes them boo, and just feeding them more and more of what they want through persuasive rhetorical tricks, bullshitting them, essentially. And that leads to social success, but is disastrous because it makes the sophist more disconnected from reality and the people that they're encouraging along their way. This type of teaching leads to pride and hubris, which blinds one to the truth. It's these sophists who give philosophy a bad name as useless. Real philosophy, genuine love of wisdom, is the path to complete development. But because most people are so corrupted, and it's only the troublesome minority that pursue the truth, they'll be put to death. And obviously, Plato is here thinking of the example of Socrates himself, who is the just man in Athens, but is put to death by the unjust rabble. Plato doesn't think it has to be this way, and that if you had an ideal constitution, truth-seeking would flourish. But the problem is we just haven't set things up properly for that to happen. So this is where he starts to talk about a divine model, essentially, which is kind of what they've been exploring this whole time. Like, what is the ideal justice, and how can we live it out? Socrates is the example of this good, and the philosopher consorts what is ordered and defined, and then hence becomes ordered and divine, often withdrawing from society, learning from the great thinkers, learning from the God. And that's something that they have to practice separately because it doesn't really fit into the education system, unfortunately. But what is this thing that we're becoming ordered to? See, this raises the question of what is the divine reality. And so at the high point of the entire dialogue, 502D to 521B, after the Philosopher Kings, the peak of this third wave, Socrates begins discussing the highest principle, the good, at the highest point of the dialogue. And the good is the un-hypothetical first principle of everything. And obviously, the Philosopher King who loves reality is a lover of the good. The Philosopher King goes on this journey to see the good, and then that helps them to make the judgments between the forms and the appearances. It's a kind of conversion experience, a transformation fundamentally, that makes them good judges to be rulers in the city. So what is the good? The agathos. Socrates says a number of things about the good in this dialogue. He said that the good is more important than justice and the virtues. In fact, it's the birthplace of all virtues. Most people think that the good is pleasure. The more sophisticated think it's a knowledge of some sort. And every soul pursues the good, in the sense that we all think the things that we pursue are good things, and the thing that all the goods share in is the good itself. Like how all the beautiful things share in the form of beauty, all the good things share in the form of the good. And so for sophists who don't believe in the good, man is the measure of all things. But for Plato, the good is really the measure of all things. This is like the ultimate source of reality that allows us to tell the difference between what exists and what does not exist. Everything that exists shares in the good. And that's why we can only have knowledge of things. The good is the basis of all knowledge and truth. So yeah, we can say the good has a threefold nature. One, it's the goal of all human action, ethics. Everything aims at a good. It's also the foundation of truth and knowledge, epistemology, because everything that exists in the good, and therefore without the good, truth and knowledge is impossible. And it's also the nature of ultimate reality, what is really real, and hence causes everything else. So it's ontological. So we'll go through each of these functions and discuss how to understand them. In order to understand the good, Socrates provides two analogies. He says he can't talk about the good itself, but he can talk about the offspring of the good in order to understand it. And so the first analogy he gives in 507 is the sun. This is an extended metaphor that in the same way that we grasp visible things with our eyes via the medium of light from the sun, the form of the good allows us to grasp the intelligible forms with our mind. So the good itself is in the intelligible realm. It's not specifically a physical thing. It has this relation to understanding intelligible things like the sun does in the visible realm in relation to sight and visible things. Because the intelligibility causes the visible, the actual sun literally is the offspring of the good, in that the good causes knowledge of the sun to be possible in the first place. So to summarize this analogy, the eye requires light to see objects. That's given by the sun. Therefore, the eye is related to the sun. The light of the sun enables sight. In other words, the light causes sight. Sight is dependent upon the light. If I turn off the light and everything's dark, there's no sight anymore. And so the good is like that in the intelligible realm. The good is the sun that provides the light that makes knowing things possible, that makes grasping the forms. So like there's our mind, there's the forms, but then there's the medium of the light that makes them possible to grasp them. So he's basically giving an account of why we can understand anything, of how our comprehensibility works. And because the intelligible causes the visible, the actual sun is the literal offspring of the good, in that the good causes knowledge of the sun to be possible in the first place. This is a reversal here, because the analogy, we're viewing the good from the sun, and when we shift, we view the sun from the good. And this sets up the divided line. The divided line is Plato's epistemology, really, and also kind of an ontology. It shows Plato's levels of being and their corresponding powers of the soul. And remember, the divided line here, its goal is to show us the good, in a sense, to get us able to perceive it. And so, yeah, this graph takes us through the levels of the divided line. The first two levels are the sensible world, which is made up of ekthesis, images, shadows, reflections, but then also paintings, representations of things. The second level is objects of belief, pistis. Beliefs, we can only form opinions of them. They're not true knowledge because they're not forms, but it's the objects that cause the images. So think about seeing a tree reflected in a pool of water. The tree is the cause of the reflection in the pool of the water, so therefore the reflection is less real than the tree. These images are like the lowest level of reality. Then you have the objects. And then after the objects, we move from the sensible world to the intelligible world. So the intelligible world is non-material, essentially. The ones in three are objects of thought. An example of this would be like a drawing of a circle, which circles in the real world represent in their drawing, but they're always less real than the ideal form of the circle. It's the universal measurement of all circles that makes circles a circle. And then the final one is the form itself. So the form is ultimately, you can think about scaling up this, like you have an image and then you have the object that causes the image. The object is caused by the form or the mathematical relations. And then the form is the ideal tree. And the philosopher's journey moves through these levels of being. Okay. You can think about like a person just seeing a tree, seeing the reflection of a tree, first of all, then seeing a tree, exploring a tree, understanding a tree, and then like going off and studying trees, getting your master's in trees. A person who has like a PhD in trees that spent their whole life thinking about it, has grasped the form of a tree, would be the philosopher who has knowledge of the form itself. And by scaling these levels, what Plato calls the dialectic, is how we reach true knowledge. Significance of the divided line is that it's ontological. So the further to the right on the divided line we go in this image, the realer it is. Each level is in a dependency relationship with the other, and there's a top-down causality. Okay, so the reflection is caused by the object is caused by the form, and then the cause of all the forms is the good itself. The good itself is the realest real thing. So each level up is the cause of the level below. Objects cause shadows, the good causes forms, but also the higher level includes the lower level and is therefore more integrated, is realer. Each level is truer in degrees of reality. So there's truth at every level, in a sense, like the good is in each part of it. But for Plato, we scale up the levels of being. We get more capable of perceiving degrees of reality. And also ethically, that we become realer by moving up the divided line, by grasping those degrees of reality. We self-realize in this case. So the good isn't on the line because it causes all of them. The good isn't a power of the soul or an object perceived, but the cause of both. We can return to the good and we can ask, we've had these two images of the good. And so we can ask the question of what is the good? The good has a threefold nature. The goal of all human action, everything we pursue, is a good. It's also the foundation of truth and knowledge. It's the cause of the forms. that we can know them. So everything that's real shares in the good. Therefore, it's the basis of truth. And it's also the nature of ultimate reality. It's the final, it's beyond being, in a sense. There's nothing higher than the good. So how are we to understand these functions and how they relate to each other? In order to understand the goal of human action as ethics, we have to return to Book 2 briefly, in which Glaucon articulated two types of goods in intrinsic and instrumental goods. We only desire the instrumental goods for the values which they afford us. So an example of this would be like money. Money gets its value from the things that it can buy. Whereas intrinsic goods are endpoints in themselves. We don't desire them for the sake of anything else but for themselves, like joy. You don't get joy to try and get something else. Or health. You don't get health to try and get something else. The intrinsic good is absolutely good and not relatively good in the way that the instrumental goods are relative to a more fundamental intrinsic good. Okay, the intrinsic goods give goodness to other goods and hence are realer, cause of goodness. When we desire a good, its goodness comes from participation in the good itself. The good itself is the source of all goodness. And so any good that we desire comes from the good. The good is the foundation of truth and knowledge. The good addresses the central problem of the Republic raised in Book 1 and 2 of relativism. The good gives truth to the things that are known and the power to know by the knower. So it's the really real. It provides reality to the lower levels, but also hence is the third measure between forms and appearances, between our sense perception and the forms. Through the existence of the good, that's what allows you to say that a sophist is a sophist, that there is a difference between appearance and reality. So how does the good give truth to the things known? Obviously, it's the cause of all of reality. And so anything that we can perceive as real is possible to be perceived as real because of the good. In the same way that anything we can see has light on it, and that the source of light is the sun. The power to know to the knower, it's the cause of our intelligibility. It's the reason why there is comprehensibility in reality, why we can grasp reality with our minds in the first place. So we have knowledge of the forms, opinions about the visible, but the good is the source of the light that illuminates the intelligible realm, like the sun illuminates visible objects. Therefore, it's the light of the good that makes knowledge of the forms possible, and truth. The nature of ultimate reality. Ultimate comes from the Latin ultimare, come to an end. On the divided line, the good is way to the right. It's not even actually on the divided line. So it's the final end point of reality. This is why you can't argue for the good, which is an important point, because every argument presupposes the intelligibility of reality. I wrote an essay on this, on why arguments against God fail because of the existence of arguments in the first place. The good is the source of intelligibility. Therefore, any attempt to critique intelligibility that wants to be intelligible indirectly invokes the good in itself. If you're interested in that, you can check out the essay. We can understand the good through its light, similarly to the sun, but we can't look directly at the sun. We're not capable of grasping it, probably because everything we see is a model in some sense, and the good is what is really beyond the models, and so we're not capable of modeling it. You know, it's not unintelligible, but it is incomprehensible in the sense that we can't fully grasp it. We can't fit it into any of our models because it's reality itself. So for Plato, you can behold the good. You can have an experience of it that converts you, converter, turns you around, puts things into perspective, essentially. What Plato means by the good is what Christians mean by God. Plato is one of the first monotheists. Obviously, he's a classical theist that God is ultimate reality or a being itself. God is not an object of sight, but that by which we see. And this solves essentially our main big problems. As Albert Einstein once said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. Intelligibility implies an ordered pattern of reality, and it is this ordered pattern that provides truth and power to know, which is the good. So the good is the ordered reality, is the source of the ordered reality, and hence our capacity to grasp the ordered reality, our intelligibility, our comprehensibility. And if you remove the good, you end up with ultimate skepticism. How can anything be true? How can we attain any real knowledge if the good does not exist? The good is pretty important. In the next talk, we're going to put all this together in the inactive myth of the cave.